Hello, and welcome to the Christchurch Fox Chapel podcast. It's the fastest growing conservative, evangelical, charismatic,
pragmatic
podcast in the entire Fox Chapel area. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Alex.
Back to our second home.
Yeah, here we are. We've been spending a lot of time up here lately.
I see that you've decided to help me by bringing me a Topo Chico.
Topo Chico.
Thank you for that.
You're most welcome.
It's very kind.
Wait, make sure that we can...
You were worried that it wouldn't come out?
Yeah, I was worried that it wouldn't
Oh, that's
be
really
picked
good.
up sufficiently.
Well,
Yeah,
this podcast is brought to you in association with Topo Chico.
And Los Yetis.
Oh, wow. You're really into this sort of...
Espanol. Sí. Yeah, so we're talking... Speaking of Espanol, we're talking about elders and deacons.
Oh, yes, very popular
in
there,
1
of course.
Timothy 3.
Numerous Spanish-speaking countries worry about this.
The churches in Spanish-speaking countries probably have elders and deacons, just like churches everywhere else.
Very smoothly done.
There it is.
So we're moving into chapter 3.
Yeah,
We've survived Woman Week at Christchurch Fox Chapel.
almost. I still have the forum to teach on it this
Yeah,
Sunday.
no, that's true, of course. Yes, you do.
Everyone bring your tomatoes.
We think that 1 Timothy is a coherent letter that's about a thing. And so obviously in church what happens is we break things up into little bits because we just can't talk about it all at once.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to forget that this actually is a coherent letter that's about a thing. And so we begin with this discussion of doctrine and all these swirling ideas going around the culture of Ephesus.
Yeah.
And Paul calling us to this constant or consistent good news that we find in Jesus Christ.
There's chaos all around.
Chaos
And he's
all around.
trying to like figure out how do you make a church thrive in the middle of a really chaotic environment.
So he's talked about church order, and he's talked about prayer, our prayer life, the effectiveness of prayer life, things that hinder our prayer life. The word likewise has cropped up, quite an important word in chapter 2. That there are things that men can do, typically, across the spread of human behavior, that will invalidate their prayer life, namely fighting.
Yeah.
Likewise, so different thing, but it amounts to an equivalent matter. Women are, in the way they're dressing, often invalidating their prayer life as well.
Yes.
So punch-ups and pearls.
Punch-ups and pearls. There it is.
Bar fights and
Punch-ups,
braids.
pearls, and what would be, and pushiness, and
I see where you're going with this.
no, not pugilism. That's punch-ups. Something that starts with listeners.
Pulchritude.
Pulchritude?
Pulchritude.
Pulchritude.
Yeah, it means attractiveness.
Oh, I was thinking
pugilism and pulchritude.
pugilism and pulchritude.
That's clearly what's going on.
But the other thing was like
It's much clearer.
you had these pugilism and everyone knows what we're talking about.
Pogonotrophy.
Pogonotrophy?
Yeah, pertaining to matters of the hair.
Oh, is that really true?
Yep.
Oh, well, there it is. But and then don't yell out and dominate women. Don't dominate the men in church.
Right. So men and women invalidating their prayer life through different gender typical behavior, and then Paul talks about the role of men and women in terms of leading the church, in terms of teaching and exercising authority. And we've posited the thesis that there are certain things, narrow things, that women are not to do, that men cannot do. And those little exceptions force us to rely on each other.
Yeah.
When we do that, we realize, 1, we need each other. 2, we're not God. We can't do it all. We're not omnicompetent. And then 3, this ability that we then have to back down and yield up and surrender our rights to the other is very helpful, because that's a wonderful model of what Christ himself does for us on the cross.
Yeah, and this is basically the exercise of mutual submission,
Right.
as Paul calls us to in Ephesians 5:21.
So as we approach chapter 3, which speaks about overseers and deacons.
Overseers, yep.
Are we doing overseers and deacons today?
Mm-hmm.
You're good.
Got it all.
It seems that it's logical to assume that this is flowing out of the discussion so far.
Yeah, I think it's all
this is connected with it.
It's all of a piece because, we have to remember too that this is a practical letter, a pragmatic letter,
Yes.
Written by an elder statesman in the church, an elder missionary who is writing to his son in the faith, and not his literal son, right? But he says in Philippians, Paul does, that Timothy was like a son to me.
Yeah.
And basically, he was his apprentice. Timothy ministered with him, trained under him, everything like that. And so now Timothy has been parked at Ephesus, and he's been tasked with bringing order to the chaos. And Paul is giving him some wise advice of what to do. And so he lays out these two offices that we see here. And I think it's important to note first that there's no exact one-to-one translation of what it means. It's translated overseers and then deacons.
Okay.
But the word overseer is the same root as episkopos. It's the root that we get for bishop.
Yes.
So, but virtually all scholars agree that bishops, as we know them in our denomination, did not exist.
So epi is kind of over, or and
skopos.
The op is like an eye, right? Looking, seeing.
Oh yeah,
optic.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've got someone who literally oversees.
Yeah.
So this is worth a little pause, I guess. Okay, so in the Anglican Church, we have these three ordained offices in the church, or three ordained things, which would be deacons and presbyters and bishops.
So diakonos, meaning the one who serves.
Yeah.
That's a Greek word.
Presbyteros,
meaning old man or elder.
Yep. And then we would have episkopos, overseer.
Yeah.
And so in the Anglican Church, we have these three things. They're distinct orders of ordained ministry. And that's not an unreasonable system to have, because Scripture shows us deacons and presbyters and overseers.
Yeah.
A pause within the pause. We tend to avoid the word priest. It's a little bit confusing. In the Old Testament, they had priests who made sacrifices in temples.
We have a priest.
The pagans had priests who killed children or chickens. And we have a priest, a high priest in Christ Jesus himself.
And he's quite effective.
He's very good at it. And if anything, there's a royal priesthood of all believers, Hebrews says. So all Christians are priests of a kind.
Yeah.
So it would be easier to make the argument, there are no priests except for Christ, or everyone's a priest that's in Christ.
Yeah.
Both of those are easier arguments to make than ordained people in your church are priests. That's the most unlikely, confusing thing we can say.
Yeah.
And it's a lazy contraction of the slightly stranger word presbyter.
Yeah,
becomes priest.
That's how that happened, right? You had
I think so, yeah.
people with a high sort of sacerdotal view of of the church that come in and they're like, see, presbyter, priest.
Yes.
See, you're a priest.
Yeah, and so in English, that's why we've ended up with this language. And Bishop Alec is quite keen on the word presbyter, and although it's a harder word to say, he will often just gently correct people who say priest, and they'll say presbyter.
Does he really? I love that.
I love that. I've been known to giggle in meetings when I hear it. I'm very, very fond of it. Almost sycophantically, which I try to avoid with bishops. But I do love it when he does it. So we have these three types of ordained minister. Now, lots of other churches arrange themselves differently. You might have a board of elders, you might have teaching elders, you might have overseeing elders, you might have deacons who serve, you might have deacons who teach and lead.
So just to clarify then, so in like the Presbyterian church, for instance, they would argue that presbyter and overseer, presbyteros and episkopos, are synonyms for the same basic thing.
Yes, and it's a strong argument to make. The terms elsewhere in Scripture seem to be used somewhat interchangeably. So it's a reasonable argument to make. And in terms of governing authority, those churches are very committee-driven. The presbyter, which is maybe the senior pastor, has a lot to say. But decisions are made synodically. They're made amongst presbyteries, where all the presbyters go and decide things together.
And they're made among boards of ruling
elders,
presbyters.
Yes.
So you can be a presbyter without going to seminary and it being your job.
And in the Methodist Church, you have a district superintendent and a bishop. And in Church of Scotland, you have a moderator, and in some of the free churches, you might have boards of elders that make these decisions. So all these churches are kind of ordering themselves in terms of church jobs a bit differently. They're all trying to be faithful to the fact that the New Testament speaks of there being different types of leader in the church.
Yeah.
It's also worth saying that the majority of what the New Testament says about leaders isn't in terms of job title, but more in terms of metaphor. Servant, pastor, shepherd, watchman, pilot, that would be someone who navigates a vessel at sea, rower, under rower, someone who is on the bottom deck of a trireme rowing oars. My favourite would be scum.
Scum of the earth. Didn't you wear a name tag that said that one?
Yeah,
time?
my official name tag at diocesan functions. Everyone else says like rector or bishop or whatever. Mine says scum of the earth.
Scum of the earth.
They printed it out and laminated it for me.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm very fond of that.
I love it.
So we have a range of metaphors that describe what leaders do. We have what appear to be specific offices of the church in the New Testament. And the modern church has taken some of those terms and done their best to kind of apply them to church life today.
Now, I have a question.
Yeah.
So in Acts, book of Acts, right, you have the apostles who are teaching daily, and then they get overwhelmed with all of the like practical stuff and fighting over... And they say it's not good for us to wait tables or to diaconate us.
Yes.
Let's appoint, so they appoint 7 deacons who are responsible essentially for mercy ministries, but they also clearly seem to be doing some preaching too, as in like that's what Stephen does. Yeah. So do you think that concept of twofold office, deacons and then elders or apostles, it was the apostles there, do you think that concept has carried over to the church in Ephesus where Timothy is?
Maybe. And at least the concept behind the concept, certainly.
Yeah.
The idea that different people do different things together.
Right.
It definitely is here. It's plainly here because he addresses 2 groups of people. And not only that, he introduces the section on overseers by describing it as a noble task. So it's a job.
I'm just going to read that.
Work.
Can I?
Yeah. It's ergon, meaning work.
Ergon. The saying is trustworthy. This is 1 Timothy 3:1. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task.
Yes. I think office has probably been put in there to make sense in English. But the point's carried through. If anyone desires, it actually says of the bishop, right?
And if anyone
desires of the bishop.
Interesting.
If anyone of the bishop aspires, is what it says. So our English translators have called it the office of the overseer.
But does it necessarily mean an office? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, they've kind of inferred it there.
Yeah.
But I think you can take that because of the word task.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm zooming on this word task, because
overseeing is a noble task.
Yeah, it's not a metaphor.
So
like navigating a ship or being a watchman in a tower. It's not or looking after sheep. It's not a metaphor. It looks like a job.
It's a thing.
Yeah.
And so there are qualifications for this job.
Yes.
Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard. It's important. Not violent, but gentle. Not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil.
So it's a very public role, and it seems that what you do behind closed doors should match what you do in public.
And it seems like character counts more than ability in the way that Paul is.
Oh, that's really interesting, because he begins by saying, here's your job, and then he gives a character description.
Yeah. we get that really mixed up in the American church.
We're obsessed with competency.
And we're obsessed with call in the sense of like do you feel called?
Oh yeah.
Do you feel, I feel called to this thing? And well, okay, what's this person's character? Are they,
so you mean if their minds were absolutely a mess, like the town, sober-minded, if they were drunk-minded,
yeah,
assuming that probably is a metaphor, that bit, they were out of control. They were they were not respectable.
yes,
Instead of hospitable, they were kind of aggressively always locking the door and wouldn't allow anyone in. They were miserly. They were useless at teaching. They were drunk, and they were aggressive and violent, and quarrelsome sounds like a fun word. I wonder what that is. Amorkos. A brawler. Okay,
a brawler.
There we go. Yes.
Don't be a brawler. Like in verse chapter 2, the men don't don't be punching each other up.
Do you know what the bit that gets me? Well, not lover of money, because I guess there's some administrative function there, right? You could manipulate your position to get money out of people, couldn't you?
Yeah, anytime you have power.
Give me this money and I'll do a good thing with it.
Yeah, I mean that's what made Paul so effective, was that what is he really after?
Here's the bit that gets me. He must manage his own household well. I genuinely think I do that. I love my kids and I try to share the word with them, and basically I am more or less the same at home as I am in public.
Yeah, you
I'm a little bit looser at home, but I'm more or less the same.
You wear flannels instead of sweaters.
There's a bit more flannel going on.
A lot more flannel.
But it's the bit here, it says, with all dignity. I think that's where I fall down at home. I think I'm inherently quite undignified. I think there's almost a total lack of dignity at home, and I'd like to see anyone try and have kids and keep their dignity, to be honest with you.
Keeping your children submissive. Okay. Yeah, what do we do with this? I struggle with this. Like, because isn't it, in some ways, doesn't it depend on them? Like, it sort of is there. It's not entirely up to me.
Yeah.
So here's how I pragmatically interpret this.
Yeah.
Because I think about these qualifications sometimes, since this describes my job. I think that having an orderly home, in the sense that it's a loving, warm environment in which, like, that has some stability in which your children can grow up, and some discipline. I think that's like what we're aiming for. I kind of view this, it's such a low standard on a lot of this stuff. It's like,
really low.
Don't be a drunkard, don't be violent and quarrelsome and obsessed with money. But I think we have to remember that, like, a lot of the people who first came to faith were not the super elite ones. Like, they were not, it wasn't exactly a bourgeois kind of upper echelon group who was coming to faith at first. Like Paul tells the Corinthians, not many of you are of noble birth.
Well, this is some interesting words you're playing with here, yeah.
So you have some people who are probably coming out of a lot of, how do I put it, cultural poverty, trauma, and some really not, how do I put it, like some really rough situations. And like that's kind of what Paul's working with here. So he's not saying, I don't think this is setting up I don't think this is like a law that's supposed to be like a picture of the ideal man.
But these are actually basic standards.
Because if you don't have someone, if your pastor is a drunkard, people get hurt, right? Like, because when a drunkard does things that are not, they're out of control, right? And you can't rely upon that kind of person. Someone who's if they're gonna blow their top, you can't rely on them, because maybe they'll say something when they blow their top that is really, really deeply wounding and hurtful. And this is the person that's just proclaimed God to you. And then, if they have their home is utter chaos, then that's not a picture of like the orderly life.
Timothy Keller had some great stuff to say about this to pastors. And he said, if you go out from a well-ordered home, a peaceful home, into a job that's chaotic, whether it's something really difficult or just the church is in chaos or lots of people are struggling or whatever, you just fail. You just have a bad day at work because you're not very good at your job. You come home to a place of rest.
Yeah.
He said the opposite would be to have a place of chaos at home and to go to a well-ordered job, in which case you always come home to a place of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it's better to minister out of rest than to minister out of chaos.
Yeah.
In other words, you'll probably try and turn your church into your home. And I know so many lawyers from my old firm who basically were kind of messing up at home. And so they turn the office into their real mistress.
So if you don't manage your household well,
you become an obsessive church leader.
You'll overwork.
You'll overwork.
And yeah. And the thing is that
workaholic. These are all about addictions, aren't they?
Yeah, it's about what are your addictions? Workaholism, money, drugs, anger, always having to be in a fight with somebody. Right?
What's interesting as well is, if you look at the historical kind of view of the bishop, and I got into this a bit last week, they've often been conflated with princelings.
Yeah.
They're given purple, they're given thrones, they're given power, they're given pointy hats, although that's a new idea. But they're given sticks to carry. There are lots of things that a prince would have as a trapping of authority and power. And the bishops have almost been modelled on some of those things. And if you think about your kind of classic image of the prince or the king, what's he doing? He's at a huge table feasting, eating chicken legs, throwing bones around, yelling,
shoving grapes into his mouth,
grapes,
and the stuff is dripping down his mouth.
That's right. Yeah, kind of
eating it. By the way, I've always wanted to eat a turkey leg like that. Like eat it all with my hands and just be like, I've always wanted to eat a meal that way.
We did this at seminary. We went to Costco on Christmas Eve, 2 minutes before it closed, and we bought a goose for $2.
Oh, you did?
It was great.
That's like a pre-cooked goose?
Nope, raw goose.
Oh, really?
Yep.
$2.
I mean, it was dead, but yeah.
That's unfortunate.
And then Ben ate a whole goose leg like a medieval king. But there's the image of this feasting king, right? Who's doing things to excess.
Yeah.
Henry VIII. Kind of just debauched, or you think about the middle king in the book of Daniel. Just he's like literally profaning the sacred vessels at a drunken feast. And then, or Herod, or any of those biblical pictures of some excessive king.
Yeah.
And look at this guy, right? Noble task. Well, that sounds like he should be ennobled at some feasting table. And then you get all of this stuff about sobriety and control and gentleness and hospitality and teaching and all of that.
Yeah.
Someone who would not be susceptible to the trappings of power.
Well, I think that this is important. I think about this a lot. I think it's so I had this church plant when I was younger, as many of you know, and I was a lot less mature. Not that I'm super mature now.
Oh, you've made it.
But
I'd say you're mature.
Yeah, I'm fully sanctified right here. But like there were things that when I would do something stupid, like the sphere of my influence was relatively small. And so I actually wasn't able to hurt very many people because like the damage that I could inflict was relatively small. Like it was my family and a few people probably like, I've probably hurt a few people in my ministry, just through weight of whatever, my failings. But as you gain more influence over other people, your own junk starts to really, it will seep out of you.
I think that's why this list is so helpful, because it's a very, very, as you say, simple list. It's a very rudimentary list, but we can look at it and say, oh man, I'm doing quite well compared to my old self, but I'm not perfectly keeping this basic list.
I mean, no one is as sober-minded and gentle and everything as they should be. But nonetheless, I think that you meet the basic minimum practical standard.
With the exception of dignity. But yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, like no one does it perfectly, but I think the test is the test for someone who's really failing to meet these standards. If you have an overseer who's really failing at it, is that toxicity is going to channel its way out through the congregation.
Yeah.
And people are going to be really deeply hurt
which is why,
by their sins.
Which is why in particular being a recent convert is a bad idea. To take someone who's literally just become a Christian and put them in charge of lots of church things is probably a bad idea. In charge of, let's just pause there and modify that phrase I just used. Not quite getting it in the text, so maybe it's sloppy of me to put it that
Give
way.
them oversight of.
Yeah, that's better. Because we looked last week at other examples of church leaders that were not necessarily overseers, but they had an influential role in teaching or leading the church.
Yeah.
So in 1 Corinthians 11, Paul talks about, actually is it 11? It talks about apostles, prophets, and teachers, right?
I shouldn't know where that is since we just preached through that book, but I don't.
Well, our heads are swirling.
Yeah.
But we have apostles, so capital A apostles. These are people directly commissioned by Jesus to write scripture. There's not very many of them. You have
lowercase a apostles.
Loads of them. People with apostolic gifting.
And apostolos just means to be sent, one who's sent.
Yeah, so church planters, missionaries, those could be apostolic, I guess. And Paul seems to think that these apostolic people are exercising a higher gift than other types of gift. It's important. You've got the prophets. And prophets, we do find those in 1 Corinthians 11 and 1 Corinthians 14.
Yep.
They are speaking exhortatory things to the congregation. So these are now encouraging teachers who are bringing knowledge of the Lord to people, right? And then we have teachers who are obviously teaching.
And evangelists who are sharing the faith with people who are not inside the church.
Yeah.
It seems like, I think that they are ranked in order of impact upon the wider church. Maybe not dearness to God's heart. Right. Because it seems like an apostle is going to have a lot of impact. They create the structure that the rest can inhabit. You know, the preacher can take the teaching and apply it directly to the hearts of the people, or the prophet rather.
So just coming back out of to go back to our Anglican paradigm again of deacons and presbyters and bishops, there are lots and lots of people in the church who are exercising teaching, apostolic and leading functions in all sorts of ways. Vestries, heads of ministry, visiting preachers, people who, we have two of our members run an entire effectively church in Blawnogs, right? Those would be great examples, Gail and Catherine, of people exercising an apostolic gift. I think. So we have a variety of people. We're speaking very narrowly here, we think, about overseers as the group of people whose ultimate job it is to guard orthodoxy.
And I think to think about the community as a whole and its working pieces together. Yeah, sort of to work as to be near the hub of the wheel, so that and to make sure that the community as a whole is okay. They're looking maybe from a certain perspective and standing back. Yeah, and I think one of the things Paul's saying is they have to be humble. Like, don't be puffed up. I read. Have you heard of Jocko Willink? He's the guy who was a Navy SEAL and does leadership stuff. He says that the number one leadership quality he looks for is humility. The ability to recognize that you don't know, and so therefore you need to step back, observe, ask, and be teachable. And that, I think that's it. Because if someone thinks, if they're a new convert, and they become puffed up, the word is literally like surrounded with smoke. Is it? Yeah, or it can mean like in the clouds, clouded. So it's like you're raised up to a point that you can't see. You have no perspective. Oh, wow. And that's a problem when you're an overseer. You can't see. That's a funny joke. That's clever. It is a joke, yeah.
We've specifically tied some of these issues. In chapter 1, we looked at the swirling false doctrines of Ephesus.
Yeah.
And in chapter 2, we looked at the importance of teaching with and exercising authority.
Yes.
Being the person that it would be the corrector or guardian of doctrinal orthodoxy.
Yeah.
In the ordinal, which is the prayer book church service for how you make someone be a bishop, there's a question, and so they're asked this question: are you ready with all faithful diligence to banish and drive away from the church all erroneous and strange doctrine contrary to God's word? It's great, and the response is, I am ready, the Lord being my helper. It's really great. I mean, I would say number 1 on the bishop's job list is banishing and driving away erroneous and strange doctrine.
And perhaps anyone who's the overseer over a community
should have the
Whatever
perspective.
So I don't know. People have interpreted this differently. I think this is probably referring to a rector or the head pastor in a community.
Right.
Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have a woman as a rector. I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail, but I think there's a bishop is definitely an overseer. I think this,
but a rector might be an overseer too.
I don't know. No opinion.
And a presbyter might be.
I'm just going to offer no opinion on that. You guys everyone can interpret that as they see right. Maybe that's a cowardly.
No, I mean, these are granular distinctions, aren't they? Very fine distinctions that we're making here, and some of it will depend on the local situation. I mean, we've got bishops in the ACNA who basically retired. Well, are they really overseeing anyone? We've got bishops who are active, but they're overseeing like 7 people, and then you're like, well, all right, but our church in the high rise at Blornox is bigger than that, so that seems a bit weird.
This is semantics at a certain point, yeah.
Yeah, or you might say, look, okay, right, I'm the rector of this church, and we've got 3 different church services and quite a lot of home groups, so I'm kind of doing an overseeing role. But I've got a boss, and I run it up the ladder I just did. You were copied in on the email.
Yeah.
Literally just ran it up the ladder yesterday.
Yeah.
And we do this often, don't we?
Yeah, it's really, really good.
So,
and it's good for it's good for the people in this church to know that we are accountable.
Yeah. We have a boss.
It's really important.
And he specifically promised that he would drive away strange and erroneous doctrine,
which
meant that he would not have his head in the clouds, but he'd be looking around. He'd be well familiar with the word, with church history, and with what it's really like to do our job as well.
And he's able to say things like, it's presbyter, not priest. Mm-hmm. So, I think all of this, essentially, in a community, good things, healthy communities don't just happen.
Yeah.
There needs to be oversight. And I think part of God in his grace equips and enables all kinds of people to make it all work together. And one specific office that is, let's be honest, not that fun.
Oh, it's dismal. It's a terrible job.
I would rather have it
is a terrible job.
I feel like being a rector sounds like a really tough job. I've kind of done it. I would rather have my fingernails ripped out with pliers than be a bishop.
The thing about being a rector is that you actually get to have some fun.
Because you get to drive gators around and actually talk to people who are lovely.
I get to go to hospital and see people, pray with them. I get to know a congregation. I get to
drive gators. I get
to drive a lot of gators. It's a great job. I think being a diocesan bishop is a really hard job. And it's touched upon here. And it's about visibility. Well, 2 things. One, it's about attack. So in verse 6, condemnation of the devil. You're getting more spiritual warfare. And 2, it's about kind of attack from people. Verse 7, he must be well thought of by outsiders. They're much more visible. I can if I have a bad week at work or whatever, not very many people know. And the people that do know me and love me well, right? So if I make a mistake at church, whatever that mistake would be, people will say, yeah, but I've talked to him 500 times. He came over when we were sick. He loves me. He gave to the building campaign. He's a good guy. Look, he had a bad day. There's context. With the case of a bishop, when they're a lot more remote and they're not known, When a bishop makes a mistake, more people see it. Fewer people feel like they know him. He's under a much more demonic and spiritual attack than I am. And there's fewer people around him to protect him.
You know, I've been thinking about this in a secular perspective about the presidential elections. And I was just thinking about how the more responsibility I have, the more of an office I occupy, the less sort of freedom to do whatever I want to do I have. And there's a part of me that chafes against that. And I was just thinking, like, the desire to be in that place of that much responsibility and accountability. I mean, both of the presidential candidates are hated by millions of people.
Yeah, and amongst their supporters, a lot of them are holding their nose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how would that be? How would that feel?
Well, they both have negative, whatever you call them, oxymoron, positivity ratings. Yes, they both have negative popularity ratings.
Yeah.
So, and that's the norm.
I mean, that's just got to be a brutal existence. So,
and at the end of the 8 years of sleepless nights, you get to go to jail for the rest of your life. You get to live in some fancy compound and you're not allowed outside.
Yeah.
Because people will shoot at you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I pray for your leaders. But if you look at this image of the bishop, it is a tough job. They're quite isolated. And this is helpful for us because as the discussion has been flowing on, there's been this looming question over us. What do you mean certain people aren't allowed to do that job? That's not fair. Because they're a prince, they get the goose leg, right? This is where the power and the money and all the fun is, right? What do you mean I can't burst through the glass ceiling and attain this wonderful job? And as we read on, we realize, well, one, it's not the only important job in the church. Two, it might not be the most important job in the church. Three, it's awful.
I actually think that verse 1 is so...
Me too.
I get it. I get verse 1.
Me too. I think it's a joke.
If aspiring to be an overseer, he's like, no, it's a noble task. It is he's like laughing because anybody who really wants to do that job, like, more power to you.
Yeah. I wouldn't want it.
It's a tough job.
It's much more noble than it looks. I mean, that might not be. We're playing with it a bit there, but I think, yeah, it's much more noble than it looks. And then we get to deacons, and it seems like a much more fun job.
Deacons, likewise, must be dignified.
So likewise, in the same way, that's an important word. Just like the men and the women punch up some pearls. Likewise, deacons like overseers.
And very similar qualities needed here.
Right. So it's a similar group of people doing a similar job.
Yeah.
Or it's a different group of people doing an equivalent job. As a thought.
Yes. Well, yeah. So dignified, not double-tongued, not addicted to much wine, not greedy for dishonest gain. Really a lot of the same things as elders.
Women's group today had a lot of fun with the much wine. They were like, oh, good. We can have some.
Oh, good. We can have some wine. They must hold the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience, and let them also be tested first, and let them serve as deacons if they prove themselves blameless.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So we're not just randomly picking people, but we're thinking carefully about who does these things.
Yeah. Their wives, likewise, bracket those 3 words. It also could equally well be translated, or perhaps better be translated, the women or the wives, likewise, must be dignified, not slanderers, but sober-minded, faithful in all things. Let deacons each be the husband of one wife, managing their children and their own households well. For those who serve well as deacons gain a good standing for themselves, and also great confidence in the faith that is in Christ Jesus.
So, lots of similarities.
Yeah.
But a couple of key differences.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the key differences we find in verse 11, where it says, their wives likewise.
Mm-hmm.
There's on its face, ESV translation, their wives likewise, tells us here that there's a really important set of rules for what a deacon's wife is like as well.
And somehow he neglected to mention that for elders.
Weird that in the overseers section, we don't get anything that looks like this. I mean, we get mention of the whole household, we get mention of the fact that they shouldn't be a polygamist, but we don't get specific instructions for the wives of bishops. in the way that we do for the wives of deacons. That's an oddity.
And it would be much more important to offer, I would think, that you discuss the wives of bishops.
Right. So that's a real anomaly, and that sticks out a little bit. The second anomaly we've got is that obviously in Romans 16 we get Phoebe, who is a deacon or a servant. The word can mean either.
Right.
But she's a deacon or servant of the church. And that of the church, I think, sounds like it's a specific public role. She's not a general servant, but she's a church worker.
Yes.
So we have what appears to be a woman deacon in Romans 16, and now we have this anomaly with the instruction to wives. And then there's just the phrase "wives likewise." Intriguingly, in chapter 2, we have the same words, slightly different word order, because for the most part, the order of words in Greek doesn't matter. You can more or less put them in any order you like, and it still makes sense in Greek. Though typically the most interesting word begins a sentence.
Is it chapter 2, verse 9?
It is.
Likewise also women.
Yes, likewise also women, chapter 2, verse 9.
It's good.
Same words.
Same words.
Translated here, likewise wives. So we've got likewise women, likewise wives. Two different translations of the same words.
So if you took that verse and you translated it, likewise also women must be dignified, not slanderers, but sober-minded, faithful in all things.
That would posit the question, women what?
Women...
Deacons, because it's a section about deacons.
Yeah.
So we have a translatory decision to make here. Is Paul saying that there's one set of rules for deacons' wives, there's no corresponding rules for overseers' wives?
On the converse, though, to that, just to be, I guess, hardcore complementarian's advocate there.
Yep.
Verse 12, let the deacons each be the husband of one wife.
Yep.
So, that, how do we interpret verse 11? Do we posit that it's likely that Paul is talking about women who are serving as deacons?
You mean, why is he not worried about wives of one husband? Because if he was speaking about men and women equally, then there should be an equal injunction here for women not to have multiple husbands. And the best answer that I've read would be that although it was known for husbands to have more than one wife, it was not known for wives to have more than one husband.
Yeah.
That's the best thing. So he wouldn't address the problem because it wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
Would be the answer. I don't know. I mean, you've got to weigh this up for yourself. ESV is a very august translation. It's my preferred translation. They've favoured wives likewise because they don't think women can be deacons.
I think that they've kind of botched the translation about surrounding women in ministry issues.
I think the weight is against them for the reasons we've just given. One, there's no corresponding verse in the overseers section. Two, we have a deacon in Romans 16. And three, the same words are translated differently in the passage above.
Yeah.
So I think, and I don't like going against any translation panel, but especially this one, that they have... they're in an error. I think they're wrong. So I guess just showing our cards a little bit. I think that for historical reasons and for, I think that the Bible is pretty clear that there are women deacons, and Paul seems to bless that, and I think that's a good thing with Phoebe among others. And this seems to create a space for it, and it's never prohibited. And as a key kind of telling of how Christians have interpreted that in the past, in the earliest Christians, there was actually an order of deaconesses. Women who did they were deacons who especially attended to the women in the church, doing pastoral care and all that stuff. Great. So it could mean either.
It could.
We favour it talking about women deacons. And just like last week, this is definitely one of those choose your own adventure moments. There are credible people on both sides.
Yeah.
And make up your own mind. But now what we have is these two offices within the church, notwithstanding all of the other things that go on in church, like apostling and propheting and teaching and all the rest of it. We have these offices. And they're not always that much fun to do. And they're very countercultural.
Yes.
And some kind of order in the home and the personal lives of these people is key as a quality of how they bring order in the church.
I actually find this really fascinating. The New Testament draws so many connections between the home and the church. It's almost like the church is a macrocosm of the home. And so the order and worship and integrity that happens in the home, in the family, is amplified in the family of God.
Right.
Because the church is not an institution. It's an organic, it's a family.
Yeah.
Right. And so somebody has to be looking out for everybody else. Somebody has to be really tasked with with serving and taking care of the concrete needs. And so I worked with a person at Trader Joe's who always was a Quaker. She was a Quaker, and she said, well, her dad was a United Methodist pastor. She became a Quaker because she said, I can't trust hierarchy. I can't, it's just corruption. And I totally get that. But it seems that there's actually, I mean, we could call it a lowerarchy, that God provides for in the church, in order to, and it should be the most boring and not noticeable thing in the world, but it provides almost an arbor for the vines to grow on, a trellis for the vine of the church.
Yeah, I love it. I find that really helpful. The deacon gains a good standing for themselves, but great confidence in the faith that's in Christ Jesus. And I would say as a deacon, and you're a deacon, that's been one of the perks of the job. Is that we've got to, our faith has grown because we get paid to read the Bible and we get paid to pray with people. When there's a miracle in the church, we're usually on the front row.
You get a front row seat to a lot of God's work. When
there's healing, we get to see it. When there's testimony, we get to hear it, and we get to hear it 3 times. And it is such a blessing to be able to work for a church. It's so great because you get to see, I mean, your confidence in faith just grows and grows and grows because of what you see. And unless your church is a disaster zone, in which case it's a very wearing, exhausting and wounding thing. Yeah. And so it's like all the sliders are up. Well, the risks and the rewards are really high.
I think it's important for pastors not to, I mean, ideally, 1 Timothy 3 is, I think, holding an ideal of leaders in the church who don't draw attention to their own leadership. And like your pastor should be, and your deacons should be people who you almost, I mean, we shouldn't take for granted the people who are there to serve, but it should be clear, like, hey, this person's the background. It's not about them. And that there are people who are looking out to make sure this community is healthy and trying to make things happen. But it is a privilege to be able to, I mean, just as one who's been in this vocation for a number of years, it's a real privilege. You see you get relationships with people that are really rich, and you get to meet some wonderful people and talk about things that normally I would never get to talk about otherwise.
So one of the challenges in this passage, I think, would be to say, okay, where's the gospel and where's the so what? Because it's lovely to sit here as 2 pastors talking about being a pastor in a passage about how to be a pastor.
Yeah.
But most of the people in church aren't going to be deacons or overseers listening to this. So why is it here? What's the point? What can we take out of this? Would be the kind of place to end.
Here's where I'm going with it. Maybe it's not where you're going, but the takeaway I get is that the church is inestimably precious to Jesus Christ. So much so that he is really concerned for its well-being.
Yeah.
For her well-being.
Yes. I think so. And I would say the whole point of having a leader who's got at least some basic health and has been selected carefully and has proper oversight over them, right, would be that this is going to enable your church to flourish. I don't want our church just to come in every week, sit in a pew, listen to us spout off, go, that's interesting, and go home. That is a failed ministry, as far as I'm concerned. Right? I would, if, at the end of my life, if that's all I've done, I've just been on a stage, and people have said that was a good performance, then I've failed.
You know what? My youth pastor told me when I was in. I told him I was thinking about going into ministry. I was probably going to be a pastor, and we were talking through it. And he gave me a verse. It was one of those moments where he gives me a verse, and he said it was John 3:30, or John the Baptist. He's going to be beheaded. Yeah. And he says, "This joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, I must decrease."
Kat's thinking of having that tattooed on her arm, actually.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah. No, it's a great verse.
I mean, not as good as the forehead, but...
well, yes, well, maybe. Biblical imagery versus personal preference. Yeah, okay. Cobweb on the face. Well, yeah. For me, my zeal is for the church to come alive. If we can raise up people who do everything, and we're seeing that, then I'm happy, right? When we're seeing it in terms of the numbers of home groups, the numbers of people on service teams, the number of people starting new groups, wanting to start extra versions of the same group all over the place.
Yeah.
When you say there's a thing happening, everyone wants to be there. People bringing their own Bibles into church, underlining them, asking questions, teaching each other, sharing, praying for each other. Look at every meal train that's happened in the last year, for every, birth or sickness or bereavement that we've been through. Like, for me, that's what I want to see, that the move away from the passive consumerist trap, as Mark Sayers talks about, right?
Yeah.
And moving away from the passive consumerist trap to active growth and involvement.
Yeah, the church alive.
Because that's the priesthood of all believers. So I think these two functional roles help enable a priesthood of all believers. So maybe I believe in a fourfold order of deacons, presbyters, overseers, and priests. And the priests are your church.
Yeah. Yep. That's really good. The Los Yetis, I think, do they agree? They do.
Well, they heard that we were drinking
Topo Chico.
And thank you for this flavoured sparkling water with lime and mint extract.
It's pretty mediocre, isn't it?
It's fizzy.
It's at least fizzy.
Well, this has been a podcast of Christchurch Fox Chapel. Thank you for joining us. We're glad you listened. And I'm sure we'll see you all very soon. And thus it goes without saying. Thanks for stopping by.
Stay classy.